Unexpected Journey, Memoir of a Siberian Deportee by Juzė Avižienytė-Žukauskiene. Translated from Lithuanian and narrated by Giedrė Kumpikas, niece of the author, and by Isabelle Kumpikas, the sister of the author. Chapter 46, New Worries. We were not destined to be happy for long with our earnings. The bookkeeper Knish, a former convict who had served time for some fraud or other, got a job here as an expert, although he was unable to make up a correct semi-annual balance. The bank withdrew its credit, and as a result, we received no pay. We did not even have enough money to buy out our bread ration. The bookkeeper held himself very high, but had little education, understood very little about bookkeeping, and got stuck in balancing the books. Then the director who had so virulently attacked me for the sacks of grain now came to ask me, no, to order me to go and help the bookkeeper. I did not want to go to work for people who held themselves so high and knew very little. I'm not a specialist. I'm not familiar with production bookkeeping. I tried to excuse myself. I know who you are. I'm ordering you and you will work. He commanded me sternly, but still, instead of to, he used use. I thought that this might be useful to us. Once again, we would receive pay, even retroactive, that is, for the past. I started to organize the documents. Chaos, disorder. Knish tried to justify himself that he had only taken over the bookkeeping 2 months ago, and that the person who had worked before him had left everything in disorder. I began from April, that is, from the time that the quarterly balance sheet had been submitted. I also found quite a few of Akulov's transgressions. Knish was fired. I became the bookkeeper. It came out that the director, of course with the knowledge of the bookkeeper, had appropriated 3,600 rubles. Clearly, I did not want to stick my head into someone else's swindling. Akulov was considered a very good bookkeeper. He was working in the regional center. I went to see him to ask him to explain about the 3,600 rubles. He asked me to bring the documents, that in the evenings he would help me correct the balance. I brought the books. He balanced everything, but I asked him to sign, since these were his and Knish's documents. All right, I'll sign. I'm not afraid, was his haughty reply. And so I made one more enemy. Akulov, as a strong worker, was a big authority. He started agitating against me wherever he could, and he especially set the manageress of the bank's current account against me. However, I had much to do there, and quite often. Needless to say, the militia, the commandant, and the prosecutor found out about everything. One time, I ran into the commandant who asked me, "Well, how is everything going? How is the bookkeeping coming along?" "Fine, the bookkeeping is in order. The shortage has been liquidated. We are receiving our pay normally." "Well, but Shatkovskaya, the bank's current account manager, has said, "Она своим документам не верит." She doesn't believe in her own documents. It seems to me that not only I, but Shatkovskaya моим документам верит, believes in my accounts. While I did not believe Akulov or Knish, especially Akulov, and Shatkovskaya probably did not believe Akulov either, since she did not accept his balance. We know, молодец, excellent, keep on working, don't give in to swindlers. He was being familiar. The work went on as usual. The tobacco had been loaded and shipped off on the barges. We were clearing the tobacco warehouse. The stronger ones were readying the wood for the winter and the forest for construction. Still others were preparing the feed for the rector's cow and the station's horse. At the same time, construction was going on. The former sauna of the old landlords was being reconstructed into living quarters. An abode was being readied for those orphans whose beautiful, spacious house had been appropriated by the station. My children and husband were working on the rebuilding. And what construction workers! They had never heard either an axe or a saw in their hands. But a Russian proverb states, "When there is no fish, even a crab is a fish." Na bez ryby I rak ryba. The 19-year-old Gosha, who had been born here in the taiga, was appointed chief constructor. The director himself was constantly coming around. First, they threw together a barracks, 5 meters long and 4 meters wide, with 1 door and 1 window. This was assigned to our family. For plaster, we used mud from the riverside and cow dung. Lime for whitening had already been brought in the spring by the barges, which had come to pick up the tobacco. They fashioned a small kitchen. We were pleased to have gotten this palace. As I mentioned before, according to the director's rearrangement, the sauna, a low little structure of the farmstead owners themselves, was being redone into living quarters. But it was discovered that once the corner stove in the sauna had been removed, the whole corner had rotted out. The construction workers, Gosha, Kamil, and my children became frightened and did not know what to do. They informed the director. He solved the situation very easily. No problem. We'll board up the hole, fill it in with clay, and it'll be fine. No sooner said than done. He even cut out a larger window, and the 4 underage youngsters moved out of their father's house into the sauna. Fall was approaching. Everyone was digging up potatoes after work, taking in vegetables, while we had nothing planted since we had only arrived here at the end of June. The nettles and oraks were ending. We used to get bread, but when there was nothing else, neither potatoes nor vegetables, nor any fat, even the director didn't dream about meat, a hungry winter was awaiting us. After the people had dug up their potatoes, we used to run and dig for potato tops. At night it was already -10 or -15 Celsius. We would find 1 or 2 frozen or partially rotten small potatoes, and even that was a lucky find. When people had chopped off their cabbage, we would go and pull out the stems with their roots. No one would leave behind even a leaf, not like in Lithuania, but even the roots were some sort of food. I would cook them for a long time. The children would gnaw at them, suck at them, and would rejoice that it was good, just as if they were pork ribs. And the water had the aroma of cabbage with the bread. This was also delicious. As a bookkeeper, I had a lot of work. Tobacco was brought from the collective farms. The station had no kerosene. There was no way of lighting the lamp or heating the drying room. Okay. There was no way of determining the percentage of the humidity of the tobacco. Some collective farms used to bring an almost green mass. The laboratory worker used to ask me that I also had to absolutely help her determine visually that percentage of humidity. The tobacco was transported by oxen in small quantities from various locations. Much work was needed to write out the receipts to determine the percentages. Besides that, there was other work to be done. The day was short and we had no light. The most complicated was to put together the 5-day balances. I used to write and count sometimes by the glow from the stove. Nearby was a pichtovi zavod, an enterprise which from a certain species of fir trees called pichtovi used to press oil. Some people would get a small bottle of this oil and would light little glimmer lights. My husband was also successful in begging for and receiving some of this oil, and I would put the documents in order. I was sitting as if in a sack, no news from the outside world. At the collective farm, at least, I used to snatch and read, or at least look over the commandant's or collective farm president's newspaper, but here, nothing. We were fed only by rumors. Some recounted that the Germans had already occupied the Caucasus and Stalingrad, that they would soon row over the Volga. Those who were a little closer to the administration gave their versions, that the Germans were being beaten on all fronts. It was impossible to believe anyone. Nevertheless, with taut nerves, we all awaited some sort of end to the war, and at the same time, freedom. For on our temporary identification forms, it was stated that we were deported for 5 years, and 3 had already passed. The days dragged on, hungry and miserable, and the end of the war was still not in sight.